On January 15th, 2025, David Lynch passed away, just 5 days from his 79th birthday. There are few artists I can say inspire me in the ways that he does, and his death has really affected me in the multiple weeks that have gone by since. I want to talk about him just as I always do, even though there have been countless videos on not just his impressive catalog of films, but on his wild music career, fine art, books, meditational practice, and his influence on video games. I myself have done a thorough analysis of the link between Silent Hill 2 and the films Blue Velvet and Lost Highway. But it was not until IGN posted a curious clip on social media informing me that there was a 2000 Sony PS2 commercial titled "Welcome to the Third Place." Wrongly on YouTube, there are other PS2 launch ads that claim Lynch was the director, but this is sadly untrue. However, they were all fascinating in their own right, and so, over the course of the video, I will be looking into what the strange Sony ad campaign meant, and why David Lynch, of all directors, was at the helm. As mentioned earlier, when you go on YouTube, multiple advertisements are often attributed to Lynch in playlists and the like. It gets even more confusing when you try to outright Google whether he did or did not direct some of these ads. The amount of names reliably listed on websites, even Sony's own, are very poorly captured, with most not giving you a single whiff of a trail on who did the work. I suppose it's to be expected given how commercial work goes in the first place. The director's vision can certainly stand out, where in these cases, strongly use surrealism and outright oddness, but Sony still wants the viewer to see it as a PS2 ad first, a David Lynch, or whoever else, advert second. And while I wasn't cognizant enough to say that it got much hype at the time, I would bet that right now, post his death, the piece is getting more word of mouth than it ever has. What I'm saying is, if PlayStation itself paid tribute to him with just the one clip, I'm going to take that as proof that he did in fact only direct the one commercial. So let's get into it. Sony's PS2 was first shown off at the Tokyo Game Show on September 20th, 1999, after being announced in March of the same year. There were playable demos of Gran Turismo 3, titled Gran Turismo 2000 at the time, as well as Tekken Tag Tournament. The demos showed just how vast the graphical and technological upgrades were going to be, and excited the massive consumer base at the time, especially with its DVD feature. Many people who had a PS2 at launch would go on to say it was their first DVD player. I know that's how I felt, given that I had a hunger to watch my special flushed away copy at all hours of the day. This was an era before the neutered and safer media that came out post 9/11, that I'd argue we're just coming out of, and was instead a time of daring, absurd, and boundary-pushing commentary. It seemed as though Sony Japan, UK, and USA were bold in their choices, referencing films that opened up the pulp culture mind's eye like The Matrix, Hackers, Fifth Element, you know the rest. This snappy neon punk lens is also associated with the booming 90s club scene, which in turn works well with the main idea Sony was pushing. Their technology was cutting edge, like the future. The Y2K aesthetic is coming back, thanks to my generation growing nostalgic. It used to be called the Gen X soft club look, which I find more fitting and less tired of a term. This was the design scheme at the time that reigned supreme, from Macy Gray to Blur to Deus Ex. And so you see a lot of these design philosophies in the commercial work. Print advertisements at the time were very popular and effective, with Sony claiming edgy statements like, "It's more powerful than God," being touted during the PS1 campaign. With the PS2, they upped the ante, using very surreal and grotesque imagery we equate most with MC Escher or the surrealist founder Bosch. I've said the word surreal many times and will continue to do so. It means that something has a bizarre and uncanny quality to it, the best example being this advert, among many, many more, that you'll be seeing as we go. The tagline in a lot of these ads, both printed and in video, is "different place, different rules." I believe this implies that the future has us fully plugged in, living in worlds of technology so advanced that we get sucked into it. This was the hope of tech nerds at the time, watching Laserdiscs, a very hunky machine that basically was Blu-ray before Blu-ray. The future tech was very expensive and almost cumbersome, but it was new, exciting, and groundbreaking. Some of us look back at the PS2 graphics now with an upturned nose because, does this really look as good as this? Well, that's the terrible thing about hindsight, isn't it? It kills the illusion of how we used to think and feel and be so in the moment. So, going forward, let's try to transport ourselves back to 2000 with no preconceived notions. And so it's October of 2000. The PS2 has launched in the US, you're likely playing Smuggler's Run or Midnight Club, and you're just vibing, enjoying the look of a brand new console with a huge level up in graphics, before popping open a snap case of The Matrix and living out all of your Aeon Flux fantasies. In November of 2000, the PS2 launches in Europe, and so does a mysterious commercial, titled, Welcome to the Third Place, inaccurately titled Welcome to the Third Space at the time. The whole thing drips with Lynch's specific brand of artistry. Right from the start, the noises of droning sirens and air makes an appearance, which is constantly used in Lost Highway and Twin Peaks. The rush of fire is all over Fire Walk With Me. The quick cut through dense branches is very much giving the same uncomfortable feeling of the close-up on the Beatles in Blue Velvet. The choice to shoot in black and white calls back to his very early short films, as well as Racerhead and Elephant Man. The casting of the man with hair high and tight, wearing a clean suit, is much like the actor Jack Nance, who is the lead in Eraserhead. The woman in white, waving and whispering, feels innocent and beautiful, much like a huge chunk of women in his movies. But the gesture to her lips is most similar to Laura Palmer in The Red Room. There's a moment of backwards talk, and a mini-man. Just like the small man in Twin Peaks. The smoke and birthing of an arm from the man's mouth is like a tamer version of the baby's birth in Eraserhead. And the three figures sitting in the tight two-seater feels very much like something he uses in his 2002 Rabbit short film, which later plays a major part in the 2006 feature, Inland Empire. With 58 seconds passing, the PS2 title font comes up. This was part of a $20 million ad campaign, including multiple other odd commercials, and many more of those print ads we've already discussed. What was this ad doing? What was it saying? And why did they specifically ask Lynch to direct? In 1990, David Lynch and Mark Frost wrote and partially directed the acclaimed series Twin Peaks. We know the story, it was very popular, and it has influenced TV monumentally ever since. But in Japan, it was on fire. Twin Peaks was canceled in 1992, but this is when it started to gain real traction in the East. Convenience stores were stocking cherry pie vigorously, knowing it was Agent Cooper's favorite. People were going so far as to literally wrap themselves in plastic, just as Laura Palmer had been when found dead in the pilot. When the prequel film, Fire Walk With Me, debuted in the East, having borderline failed in the West, the distributors literally held a mock funeral for Japanese folks to mourn Laura. All of the hype is extremely impressive, because logistically, Twin Peaks was not easy to get a hold of to watch over there. Japanese people had to special order it at stores with crazy import prices, or go through a very pricey subscription satellite program called WowWow. This was also not a situation where they had just liked David Lynch from the start, because his films at the time were still in midnight theaters, so their love of Twin Peaks came pure. For a very, very long time in the US, doing a commercial for TV as a big director was looked down upon. Commercials were not seen as art at all, and sometimes the director would be considered a sellout. David Lynch didn't quite feel this way, but he certainly did not like product placement obstructing a message. Yet with a commercial, it all comes down to very simply money. See, David Lynch has always struggled with funding his films, and when he did get a big break, studio interference would always muck it up. You can see this with Dune, which was truly a nightmare for him, and with Twin Peaks, when the TV executive forced him into revealing the killer too early. Things happened, and they canceled the program. Every time he got a big break, it seemed like something stopped him momentarily. It was either the studio, or it was the audiences. Like with Blue Velvet being a very good film, with hard-hitting imagery and a lot to say about white American suburbs, but it got critically hit in the gut from reviewers, pushing it down a bit in public opinion, and the number of theater showings. In Japan, there had been a trend of having American directors secretly filming commercials, allowing those artists to pocket a huge chunk of change. If you look more into Lynch's effect on the commercial industry, it's a fascinating journey of legitimizing things, but that's a bit beyond the scope of this video. With all that being said, he directed multiple coffee ads using fan-favorite characters for Japanese TV. This, of course, prolonged the love of Twin Peaks and continued the interest in Lynch himself. It makes a lot of sense that Sony then decided to use him as the head of the PS2 ad campaign. Oof, finally made it full circle. So this is why I believe he was chosen to make the commercial, and one reason why so many things are callbacks to his other work, to interest people enough to see his films that were not yet so popular outside of the US. Remember, this was released a year before Mulholland Drive, the movie he's likely best known for that's often dubbed his masterpiece. Now, those are all fine reasons, but what did all that have to do with the main idea of Sony's PlayStation 2? Well, a lot of the PS2 ads are surreal. He's got that down pat. But they also displayed a very banal and plain life growing incredibly interesting because technology played a role. While his commercial is very analog, with smoke and grayscale, it still gives a higher level of intrigue into a standard stroll through a hallway. His work, as always, opens up possibilities of wonder. And so in the commercials following after, which are wrongly thought to be his work as well, continue this sense of new. Let's look at the Bambi ad. It starts off very typically with an innocent doe running around before being blindsided by a car striking it. Instead of killing the animal, the car gets destroyed, but the doe walks away, totally in one piece, before bringing up the words, "Different place, different rules." There's a scene in Lynch's Disney film, The Straight Story, where a distraught woman hits another deer and drives away like mad. I believe this commercial is referencing that film on purpose, but going along with the PS2 theme of making banality interesting. This does a great job of that. The next commercial is called Rabbits, but without any rabbit, including droning noises and a sleeping dog that seems restless. I want to relate it to Lynch's 2002 short film Rabbits, but that wouldn't work on the timeline. At the end, the words, "Visit your third place" rolls onto the screen. What I feel like this means is that there is a waking world, the dreaming world, and the PS2. Lynch often talks about the elusive subconscious, citing it as what he sums up everything as. It's the reason he did his work, how he did it, and why his work feels like a dream. The subconscious just references the part of the mind that influences thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without being fully aware. The elusive aspect of that means it's difficult to grasp, something special when achieved. His later work, especially in what became his last and most difficult to understand piece, Twin Peaks: Return, is the amalgamation of the subconscious mind, a dream state, a fluidity of sense and reason. From as early as Eraserhead, Lynch made things that were otherworldly, like he was speaking his own language. This made his pieces endlessly satisfying to take meaning from, and that is what I feel Sony wanted to do with not just their commercials, but their system. The PlayStation 2 is still my favorite console of all time. Not because of nostalgia, not because of a handful of my favorite games being purely from it, but because it changed everything. The range of the games, from a simple shooter like SOCOM, to an incredible arcade racer like Tokyo Extreme, and then a horrific take on oppression in Silent Hill 3. The system made countless statements that stand the test of time. Whether the commercials sold systems or not, it let people know that Sony was cooking up true art, and they really had a genuineness that I can't say still stands. I am continuously impressed, 25 years later, with the system, and I don't think that will ever change. I have little else to say about this topic, but before the video ends, I just want to say my piece on Lynch himself. I'm an artist who has suffered a lot with wanting to create in the past few years. Very typical of an art student post-graduation. I teach people to paint, to draw, and to create, but I lack a lot of that motivation in myself these days. It becomes harder and harder to want to pick up a pencil and draw something the more time I spend away from it. Lynch made many films, what he seemed most passionate about, but he didn't shy away from writing books, making music, creating furniture, and multiple other artistic ventures. I feel like the way he took art and spun it on its head when he was maybe tired of doing one thing is something I've also been doing. Writing short stories, making these videos, and various other little things. A lot of times, artists get stuck in the negatives of life and constantly create negative work. And while Lynch made films with such dark material, he always had that sense of positivity and light. If there is anything to learn from him, I personally think that letting go of expectations and just doing what comes naturally, purely, is what I need to keep sight of and do more. Watching his films and investigating his ideas in the past year or so has been one of the best gifts I've given myself. Boundless creativity is in everything he did, and him letting us in on all of his secrets is truly humbling. Thank you, David Lynch. You were truly an inspiration to anyone who would listen.
Every day, once a day, give yourself a present. Don't plan it. Don't wait for it. Just let it happen. It could be a new shirt at the men's store, a cat nap in your office chair, or 2 cups of good, hot, black coffee.